if you tweak the human, like you say, purchasing patterns, habits, living quarters, food intake, I mean, you could change somebody's personality by the food they're eating. If you could tweak that and wire it down to a science, okay, the physical body is going to respond with a frequency outbound. Now, if you need to do or track or eat or use that frequency as something, then maybe that's how a human could be farmed, quote unquote.
You were probably on my show at least 5 years ago, maybe longer. Now, I remember from the very beginning, you know, you've really talked about the coming weather changes. You know, I've watched, I can't tell you, countless amount of your videos that seem to be just, you know, really fulfilling, I wouldn't say the prophecy, you don't say you're a prophet, but what you said, the predictions that you said, yeah, the predictions that you said, how, you know, we see those coming to pass. And this goes back to cycles, as I try to tell people, Dave, and we can certainly dig into this further, but I tell people we're trained to think in a linear fashion. You know, January 1st to December 31st, or a 2-week break, you know, from here to here. But nature and science and the universe, whatever you want to call it, it works in cycles. It works, it's like the seasons, right? The seasons are cycles, cyclical. And the weather is cyclical. And right now, the fact of the matter is, the cycle for a grand solar minimum, we're just coming back into that again. The last one, I believe, was the Maunder minimum. We're coming back into that now again. And I don't know, David, we can go into this again. So much to talk about today. I don't know if before we were thinking this may not be that bad, but I've heard that it may be really bad. So I don't know. It's hard to nail that science down, maybe. Anyway, I'm going to turn the floor over to you, David, because you're the smartest guy in the room when it comes to this stuff, no doubt. So I'm going to turn it over to you, David, and go ahead and give us a background on the Grand Solar Minimum, a little bit of the history for new listeners, and why you're concerned about going into 2022, 2023 as it pertains to the weather and the crop loss and everything else. David DuByne.
I'll just tell the story the way I see it right now playing out in the world and why we all should care about it. You know, if you think about 2022 coming up, CF Industries, which is a major fertilizer producer, the CEO came on the record and said there won't be enough fertilizer next year for everybody's needs, so look for crop yield declines. Well, that's on the fertilizer side, and that's scary in itself. But knowing how much grain we lost out in the fields this year and how much fruit production, nut production, vegetable production was affected by these out-of-season events that seem to be getting more intense. You know, record cold in Russia this early already. I think it was 67 degrees Celsius, below zero today. And up in Scandinavia, also setting the coldest records ever set for this time of the year. And the massive amount of snows in the southern hemisphere, record snow down in Hobart, almost all the way to the beach, coming a week before summer in Australia. So there's a lot of these signs out there showing that, okay, nature's going to do its thing and reduce the crop yields on the 400-year cycle. But at the same time, now we're getting this man-made input into it where there's not going to be enough fertilizer to really jack those plants to get them to produce. So now we got two sets of variables declining in the crop production. And then we see over in those arc storms wiped out pretty much Vancouver Port, and they're calling force majeure on grain deliveries. So you're starting to see things happen all over the planet as, okay, that checks the box, that checks the box. But if you don't know what a grand solar minimum is, it's just an electrical state of activity on the sun and how our planet responds to it, the connection electrically, those magnetic field lines coming down. When that changes, so do the jet streams in the cloud cells. And that kind of what throws off the planting and harvesting dates. And that's why through history, you start to see that the food is the main thing that goes out of sync that affects the rest of society. And I find it so interesting that the culmination in the apex of where this magnetic canceling and different effects with our crust and just strange anomalies of earth cracks and different sinkholes and things rifting, the culmination of that's October of 2024. But then we have this great reset inbound right this second and all these things being pushed for these next 2.5, 3 years. I say it's to control at the ultimate end, to control access to food. Because if you know what the grand solar minimum cycles do, they knock food production out at the knees, 40 to 50% reductions in wherever agriculture whatever its species being grown, unless you're indoors, which now we have an advantage with the new tech. We can grow indoor. But let's go back 4,000 years in time, those last 10 of these events. There's light ones, there's heavy ones. Heavy one is a Maunder minimum type event. Lighter ones would be something like the Dalton minimum. They alternate, just like La Nina and El Nino. Those are cycles. Hotter water in the Pacific, warmer water, El Nino. Cooler waters, La Nina. And everybody knows that. And you know the 11-year solar cycle, solar maximum, solar minimum. So even if you don't know it, you're already familiar with a lot of cycles in our world today. The La Nina, El Nino pattern, the solar cycles, maximum, minimum. Now, let's just take that up to a 400-year cycle. It's a cycle.
Right.
It's the same. You map it out, it's the same. So it's going to cause a lot of problems, and you can see why governments are responding in advance of trying to front run everything happening to jump in front of these changes so they can still retain in power and in the warped way it's being done, not allow society to collapse as quickly or as far down as it would go, at least in their twisted minds. Meaning they should have warned us 20 years ago, and I was doing this 7 years ago, and here we sit today on the cusp of it, and we've squandered all those years of getting solutions ready.
Right on. And, you know, I think something that's very important, I think, to note as well, and I think it's no, I'm gonna throw this out there, David, and you can
throw it. Agree, I got the catcher's mitt right here.
I hear you, man. You know, brother. So we're seeing in Australia, and follow me here, we're seeing Australia basically being taken over by the military. It is turned into a police state because China wants to have the country of Australia available to grow crops, because every time, if I remember correctly from studying your videos and doing shows together, every time one of these grand solar minimums roll around, whatever dynasty is in power in the country of China loses power because basically they can't feed their people. China has, I would suggest to you, you may know the numbers, I think they have more of a population now than they've ever had in history. I mean, they have billion something people. If they had problems back in the Maunder minimum and previous grand solar minimums, they're going to have some serious problems now because the amount of mouths they have to feed surpasses any time in history when a solar minimum has come in. Can you comment on that, David? Do you think China, that's the reason that we're seeing the attack on America right now? Is this all, if you look at the bottom of it, is it all to get land to grow crops for the Chinese people? David DuByne, what say you about that?
Yeah, that's taken it in one direction, but another direction to go at the same time to remove the quote unquote useless eaters through a social credit score. If you're not good, if you don't kowtow, if you're not subservient and obeying and giving up everything and just acquiescing to every request, that kind of social credit score, if you're not one of those, then they don't want you around. But I was taking at it from the end, understanding China has huge mineral deposits and mining company and mining operations in Australia, as well as so many other things going on, from the production of goods itself to the crops. Now, I was looking at it more, Australia, now this time to frame it, the Southern Hemisphere is leading the Northern Hemisphere by one season on this grand solar minimum. So the brutal, unbelievable, even up to a week before summer, snow dumps of record proportions down in the Southern Hemisphere, we're going to experience the same thing in our spring up here. They're one season ahead, this one, for some reason. So whatever the Australian authorities and government see down there, they see that next year they're probably not going to maybe themselves grow enough food, but globally, that if they can't grow what they need, then there's going to be a huge problem. So if that was me, I would station police and army at every single supermarket and then dictate how you could go in or out of the supermarket and control what you could buy. Because we're going to come down to a time in 2022 where it's going to be like, one loaf of bread for your family. Your ration card is full. Oh, that's a digital ration card. Sorry. That's been revoked. That's been revoked. That's not up to date. You can't even go in the supermarket, swipe the code and open the door to even buy anything. My bad. Next. And they just won't care. Really, they won't care.
Well, you know, I just read earlier where they have the technology now. I think it was on Zero Hedge, perhaps, or maybe it was on Gateway Pundit, one of those publications, where they have now they have a implantable in your hand they can implant the vaccine passport chip into your hand. Now, all the information that you would need, that they would need for a person. I mean, you can fit an encyclopedia on a pretty small amount of hard disk space. So, the stuff that, your history and your health records and that type of thing can easily be put on one of those little, size of a grain of rice or something. David, this isn't a religious show, brother, but that sounds awful. Revolution, or a book of Revelation to me is putting this chip in your hand. Now, the social credit score was, I think, the precursor to that. But the fact of the matter is, now they want to come out and they control the cryptocurrency. The fact of the matter is, they want to control you in every aspect, from cradle to grave, from the moment you're born, every purchase that you make, every place that you visit, every appliance that you buy. They want your whole house and your whole life basically to be able to be tracked at their disposal. Am I being a little bit too over the top on this, Dave?
No, I'm going to take it a step woo-woo further, if you don't mind.
Go right ahead.
Because that cradle to grave, okay, you're talking about the physical body and control of the physical body to get that mental state into a vibratory pattern of whatever it is: complacency, fear, lack, scarcity, one of those kind of low vibrating resonance fields. But that's what I think the ultimate control is to keep you in that state of vibration. Because if you're under that much control, you're always going to be under that much duress. So if you tweak the human, like I say, purchasing patterns, habits, living quarters, food intake, I mean, you could change somebody's personality by the food they're eating. If you could tweak that and wire it down to a science, okay, the physical body is going to respond with a frequency outbound. Now, if you need to do or track or eat or use that frequency as something, then maybe that's how a human could be farmed, quote unquote. The spiritual realms, since you mentioned that, and the physical realms are quite something different. So, maybe I went a little too off the tangent on that, but, I see different aspects and different, facets of a diamond moving forward. Ancient religions always talk about this time right now being this crux point of battle of good and evil, light and dark, whatever it is. So those are also frequencies. You take a look at the love, the light, that sort of higher vibrational frequency, things that are in state in that field are way different than something that's vibrating so low that it's almost becoming iron by the atoms barely moving, where it's almost going to solidify in front of you. I think that's where we were taking the last 300 years or so, at least on the Yuga cycles. We just come out of the Kali Yuga, Iron Age. So you can see really what it means, those different vibratory patterns. Now, where do we sit in there? And over the next year, if you had 1 billion humans that you could tweak to put out a specific pattern of all billion with the exact same frequency, then how could that be utilized? But again, that comes back to changing the situation on taking our planet back by using our minds, not our bodies, because they're terrified of the frequency unification field of all of us come together on a frequency in our minds compared to what we do with our physical bodies. Hugely different scare factor for the elites in charge right now.
No, and essentially is what I've said on this program numerous times is their kryptonite. The kryptonite for them is an awake public who's aware of that they're being conned. The con can only continue to go as long as the people being conned don't realize they're being conned. Once they realize they're being conned, the whole con falls apart. Day by day, one person at a time, it seems, and now it's happening in mass. People are realizing it's all been a con. And once you reach that tipping point, David, where that 51st person, if you will, realizes it's a con and that starts going, their way of doing things is over. And I believe we're very, very close to that. I'm optimistic about what's going on moving forward, even though we do have some weather challenges coming up, but civilizations have went through that before and they've survived it. I'm optimistic. Are you optimistic as you sit here today?
I am, after we go through the next few hurdles. So weather is, the grand solar minimum climate aside, that's going to, have some difficulties with agriculture. We could switch crops. There's a lot of solutions we could do to mitigate what's happening with the crop yield losses across the planet. We could definitely move to different crop species, hemp, for example. But you're right. We're at the crescendo point right now where everybody's going to wake up at the same time and they're going to be angry. So hence the police state's already in place. It's like a prepositioned asset, knowing again, that stimulus input, at some point it's going to wear off. Like the fear is wearing off for so many things right now, and people are starting to see fact versus fear. But once that awakening point comes, then what are the elite going to do? And I should say, the heads of central banks, the leaders of multinational corporations that then themselves own 500 other multinational corporations under the umbrella of, there's like 6 companies owning everything, the leaders of those companies, business itself around the planet. Like, so those people who are trying to control that money flow and that energy flow, they're going to retort. They already know the impetus has taken us to this point. They obviously know what's going to happen in the crescendo point after this. So what lies on the other side of the bump? I say access to food being denied or completely curtailed. If you had access to a military police, you control the politicians that then wrote the laws to do what you want to do because you're lobbying and campaign donating so much. So you got the judicial branch, you got the military, you got the politicians, you got all the companies, you got the media, everything's swirled into one package. All right, so the citizens are going to behave one way once they get really aware, and they're not going to be very happy. And that's an understatement. There's probably 4 or 5 different scenarios that are going to play out. But again, those have all been gamed out already. So, over this next hump, that's where we got cut off. I was like, what do you think is going to happen once everybody becomes aware and they start taking action to do whatever it is, X, Y, Z? Everybody, every family, community, states are going to behave differently, but it's all going to be about the food, for me, in my opinion, moving into 2022. Food up and up and up, and how people are going to respond and how governments would respond.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's part of their plan, right? The part of the plan to collapse the economy, the financial economy, and the food economy as well, is, they're doing a good job of it. I'll tell you, whatever they're doing a good job of it, unfortunately. But again, I'm optimistic. Maybe I shouldn't be, but I'm optimistic. I think that we're going to overcome these scoundrels. I really do, David.